Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Masks Off. So excited to be here today. We have another guest speaker on today, but first I will introduce myself. I am Kim.
And I am Tia.
And today we have with us Margot Zaher, and we are going to be talking about many things today, but one in particular, some of the things that we're going to be talking about are from her book, The Golden Cage, From Entrapment to Empowerment. So holding up the book. And as always, we start with a quote, and we're going to use a quote from her book. So the quote is, "Silence is the key to connecting to your heart." Do you remember writing that?
I do remember writing that. Thanks so much for having me.
Yes, no worries. So, Margot, do you want to tell us a little bit in your own words, a little bit about yourself? Give us a little bit of your bio.
Yes, I would love to. So, I'm an empowerment and relationship coach. I've been working with all sorts of different kinds of people for many years, probably for over 20 years, doing different kinds of coaching. And right now, I am focused on supporting women, specifically in relationships who are either stagnant, they wish it was just somehow a little bit better or like it used to be, and really helping them look at their relationship patterns, uncover what is stopping them from connection, and reclaim that power so that they can feel empowered in the relationships and have that kind of connection and trust and love that they really yearn for. So that's my specialty, and I'm really excited about it.
That is so great. And I
Fantastic.
love what we're going to talk about today because, you proposed this and we just love it because we're all about masks. And so we're going to talk about the relationship mask and all the other stuff you just talked about and how you support people and recognizing the relationship mask that they are wearing. So how about we start off with, how would you define a relationship mask and how do you know if you're wearing one?
That is such a good question. So for me, it's pretending that you are something you're not exactly. So it's having to put something on to support you and protect you so that just in case somebody is either rejecting you or may have a negative thought about you, they won't really see who you truly are. So it's this protective thing we wear. And I believe that there are different flavors of these masks that we wear, but a lot of times we put them on as a protection mechanism. So we think we have to be something that we aren't truly. We have to show up a certain way to get that kind of love and connection we really want in relationships. And this is any type of relationship, whether it's a family member or whether it's a coworker or whether it's in our personal romantic relationships.
So is there a way that you feel that people either conforming with this mask to feel loved and to feel seen and heard? And so when you talk about empowering women in their relationships, how do you help them start to identify those flavors of the protection that they're doing or they're conforming? What does that look like? How do you help them step into their relationship with more authenticity?
Yeah, there's actually 9 different ways that we can categorize people conforming.
Wow.
And wearing a different kind of mask. For me, I categorize that and support what I use is the Enneagram. Have you heard of the Enneagram? And I believe that those are actually 9 different ways that we can show up and actually we have an ego role. So for instance, I'll give you an example. One of the types is having to be really competent. So for instance, I am that type. And so I want to show up really competent for my partner. Like I have my act together. I don't want to really admit that, I make mistakes. And so there's a small part of me who has this competency mask that I have to be careful of. Am I wearing this mask? How am I pretending to be more competent than I might be in a situation? Or how am I, hoping to sort of cover up a mistake I made, like, instead of really admitting to it. So those are like an example of like the competency mask. So that would be one flavor. that
I love that.
you would see in a relationship.
I love that. Do you want to quickly explain? I don't know, Kim, if you've heard of Enneagram or some of our listeners, I'm sure have not. So do you want to explain that really quickly, what that is and how, I don't know if you want to talk about the shape or the lines or.
Yeah, I mean, that's
Oh.
a very complex explanation.
But just
But
like really quickly, just to, or they can, where they can go to get more info, just so they know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So let me quickly explain what the Enneagram of personalities is. And it's a way that you show up in the world, that your ego almost shows up in the world, and how it can handle stress. And it allows you to feel like you're somehow in charge in different ways, that it's a protective mechanism. It shows up in 9 different ways. And so basically the idea behind the Enneagram is that there are sort of 3 different categories of ways that you show up. So one way is this. There's one little category are the people who really feel like they need to be in control. They need to control their environment. They need to either control other people, they need to control their emotions, they need to control their environment. So that kind of part. Then we have the segment. There's another segment that's all about image. So they have to have a certain image to be protected in the world and to get their needs met. So it's all image based. And then we have what we call the mind types, which I'm a mind type, which is basically how their core issue, their core thing is fear. And so basically they use their mind to try to make themselves feel safe. So one example would be a scientist. Sometimes we hide behind all of our knowledge. We're like, oh, I'm going to accumulate tons of knowledge and that's going to keep me safe. That's like an example. So I don't know if we have time to go through all 9 types, but it's really fascinating when you learn what type you are on the Enneagram, because basically that's your core drives, what drives your personality. And so we all have a core drive. And whether your drive is that you need to control, whether your drive is that I need to make sure my image is good for the world, or whether it's I need to keep myself safe by using my mind, basically. I'm sort of simplifying. Those are the 3 big quadrants.
So you use that a lot in helping your clients.
Yeah, well, so one of the things that I often do right away with a client is figure out with them where they fall in the Enneagram. So the good news for our listeners is that you can go and find online tests for free and play with this yourself and see what comes up. And then you can figure out from there, hey, what's my normal behavior pattern that I'm trying to, what's the mask I might try to wear? So if you're a 1 on the Enneagram, for instance, you might try to be a perfectionist. You might have to be perfect. That would be the way you would show up. So I could quickly go around and just say what the 9 kind of big things are, but like the 1 is being a perfectionist. You have to show up perfect. The 2 is the caretaker. Basically, you want to take care of everybody so you get that love that you desire. Mm-hmm. The 3 is the achiever. You have to achieve. You got to have your recognition, like, oh, recognize me as really performing. And get that love that you seek that way. The 4 is, well, some people call it like the hopeless romantic, but basically it's about being unique and seen in the world as like, wow, I have all these gifts and talents. Recognize me in my uniqueness. So that's the 4. The 5 is the one that I said is, like sometimes we call it a specialist. It hides behind having to really have all your knowledge together. Like I know it all. It could be a know-it-all is what I refer to it a little bit in my thing, because, hey, I have all the knowledge. You guys don't know what you're talking about. I do. And they tend to specialize in very specific things. So then we come to basically the 6, which is they hide behind competency. They're also called the devil's advocate too, which is they're the ones who are like, okay, folks, what's really going on here? Let's make sure we're all competent. We have our act together, because they're afraid that somehow or another they're going to be found out. This is the ones that are really concerned about safety. So let's all make sure we have our act together and we work as a team. They're really good team players. The 7 is the enthusiast. Some of them people call them the ones that really go for adventure in life. And what they're doing is trying to really take in life to its fullest, go for everything, just like, hey, life is an adventure, let's go for it. And they're constantly filling up their calendar with all these activities, but what's driving them is the fear that if they actually stopped, they would feel things they don't want to feel. So they just keep being busy. So that 7, if it shows up like in a mask, is all like, everything's great, folks, why are you upset, let's just go for it. They show up as comedians, you know, those really fun loving people. And you're kind of like, do they have anything like more to say here? Is it just all about fun? You know, they tend to be very fun focused. They're delightful, of course. All Enneagram types have their delightful side, their not so delightful side. The 8s show up as the boss. That's kind of the mask they wear, is like, I'm in charge here, folks. Let's do what I say. They are really afraid of people seeing how vulnerable they really are. So they have to be really strong. So there's a sense of strength in there. And then the 9s on the Enneagram are the peacemakers. They're the ones who often have this mission, and we want to, you know, create change and peace in the world and create peace in my relationships. So their big challenge is conflict avoidance. They avoid showing up completely. They have trouble with their boundaries. And so they're constantly trying to like create all this sense of peace. And yet they don't know who they are themselves. They sometimes get really lost. So, you know, in a relationship mask, they could have this whole mask of being peaceful, like, oh, everything's fine, everything's great. And then they may explode later on down the road.
So I have a couple questions. One is, do we come into the world with this? Or, you know, it's always been my kind of assumption. We come into the world as babies, like with clean slates. Is this something that is in our DNA, or is this something and then comes out as life happens and we're conditioned, or is it something that just happens after the fact? We'll start with that question.
It's a great question, Kim. And I don't know if there's a definitive answer on this. I can only give you my perspective, honestly.
Yeah.
I believe that it is conditioning, and that it's conditioning in those really important years. I would say, when I say important years, like the 5 to 8-year-old range, when your sense of identity, you start feeling the separation between you and your parents. I believe that they say that actually it's really hard to type children, and even teenagers, and that you really don't really know somebody's true Enneagram until probably they are, you know, 18 to 21, but you can get a sense of it.
Okay.
One of the reasons we say that is that their different phases of childhood development actually correspond to different parts of the Enneagram anyway. So like the whole thing about who am I want to be unique in the world. That's a 4 energy, like the one I said about the uniqueness, but it, almost all teenagers have a lot of those characteristics, right? So I believe, in my experience, I can see things in my childhood at certain ages that led me to feel the world wasn't safe. And my whole Enneagram number is about, how do I feel safer in the world? How do I help other people be safer in the world, basically?
Yeah. And I noticed too, and I always find it so fascinating with relationships and people that I see, you know, in my environment, where I'm always seeing one that is typically generally stronger, more in control, you know, and actually encompass more than one of those that you described. And then the other who, I mean, I hate to use the word weaker, but, you know, more the peacemaker, more the people pleaser, more. And therefore, like, those opposites attract, you know, you bring together the one that wants to be in control, that is more dominating, with one that is willing to, you know, be, hey, I have to be competent. Let me just do what needs to be done so that you like me. Let me be peaceful, whatever. Do you have any thoughts about that? And then 2, can we encompass more than one of those on the Enneagram? Because you described the 9, and I'm like, I can see myself in more than one. And then I can see people in my life having more than one.
Yeah, the Enneagram is a quite a complex system. so one of the things to understand is that you, two things happen. One is that you have wings. So basically the two numbers next to you on the Enneagram, you can take on their flavor of that number. And so therefore you actually are kind of a blend or can move into these other wings. So for instance, if I'm a 6 on the Enneagram, which I am, I have a 7 wing, meaning that 7 enthusiastic energy.
Mm.
And I also have that 5, I say the scientific wing. And I have both of those in my wheelhouse, but I naturally play more with my 7 wing. I actually play so much with it. Some people think I'm a 7 sometimes. So depending on who you are, you may switch into more of one of your wings. And then this is also much more complex for this podcast probably, but you also can move. There's certain lines of movement. They're called integration and disintegration. So there are certain directions on the Enneagram where you can actually move to 2 other numbers, you move to another number, and you either integrate when you're in your best state, you have more of those characteristics of that number. And when you're in stress, under stress, you need to watch out for the characteristics of that number. So for instance, I'm a 6, I disintegrate to 3 and I integrate to 9. But this is such a complex system. But to let you know, though, that you do have the ability to interact and actually kind of take on some of the characteristics of some of the other numbers.
Well, and, shifting from that into, because I'd love to have some conversation around your golden cage analogy and how that mask, because this, as having read your book and hearing about the mask and the Enneagrams and the types, I can see how those create golden cages in our life. So can you explain the golden cage to our listeners?
Yeah, thank you, Tia. So the golden cage is basically you building an energetic cage in your life. It can be a relationship cage, a career cage, but in an area of your life where you basically build this sense of entrapment out of fear. And I use the word golden because often this cage that we build has this sense of something really positive about it. It means gold. It can be somehow beautiful. So for instance, it can be either that it's a lucrative cage. It can be that there's prestige in it, that there's connection, there's comfort in your cage. So for instance, I used to have this high-paying job at Procter & Gamble in Paris. That was my golden cage. It was prestigious. People were jealous, and financially, obviously great. And it was something that people were like, wow, I've spent a whole lifetime wanting to get here. So basically that is the idea, is that you hold yourself in this container, this safe space, quote unquote, but it keeps you stuck in your life.
And I love the image of the goldenness and how it can look beautiful, but inside, if you're feeling trapped, it's not so beautiful. And it brings us back to the quote that Kim shared from your book. Silence is the key to connecting to your heart. So when we're in these cages, are we able to connect to our heart? Or how does that influence that knowing, because even when you were talking about the Enneagram and how that one, the play one, they get really going because they can't be silent and see what's underneath. So how does that quote come into play with all these masks and the golden cage?
That is such a good question and quite complex to answer. One of the parts is that it's true when you're really busy upholding your mask, when you're busy with this whole like, this is who I am and nobody can see beyond it, and you're trying to keep this cage in place, there is a lot of energy that comes into play. You are having to really work hard at making sure that there aren't any cracks in the foundation, that nobody can really see beyond what you're trying to, to create and say, oh, this is who I am. And so I think that when you allow yourself to relax and say, okay, who am I really? Am I really this mask that I've been wearing? That quote, in order to really do that, it's about connecting to oneself and getting back to that silence inside. And in order to do that, it does take quite a bit of awareness about what are the games I'm playing, what are the masks I'm wearing. And so I think our society, unfortunately, and it's true, I know for me, it's harder and harder to almost find silence because there's so much coming at us. And so those times of introspection when we can either be outside by ourselves to really tap into what really is true. You know, am I playing a game here? Do I really want to be in this particular career, situation, relationship? I mean, what's really true for me? And then it's in those moments of stillness that we can start getting those messages from our heart, like, wow, yes, I do want that, or no, something doesn't feel right here. It's in those messages, it's in those moments of aloneness and silence, I think, that it's easier to tap into the truth.
Definitely.
I know for me, that one of the masks that, I have worn for a long time is caretaker, that of the caretaker. I've been a stay-at-home mom. My kids are 21 and 18, but since my son was born, I've stayed at home as a young child. I felt that I had to take care of my parents, my cousins that I lived with, and all of that. And that is a mask. It is also a cage. It's also a prison, whatever you want to call it. But all of it, I created it. And I'm not putting blame on myself. I'm not saying this to be hard on myself. It just is what it is, that it is a creation in my mind that because the caretaker is what seen as oftentimes like, oh, you're so caring, you're so loving, and you give so much of yourself. But that is also, and I wonder if that is like why I asked the question early on about the Enneagram is, do you come into this world with this, like toward having a slant or a bent toward it? Because I feel like for as long as I can remember, it's been the focus on the other and not myself. It felt too selfish, even as a kid, to go inward and focus on me. And I don't know where it came from. You know what I mean? It just feels like it was always there. And so from that, there was also this external validation because, oh, she's such, a giving person. She's so easygoing. She's so cooperative. She's always a team player, blah, 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 blah. But now it's like, oh my God, I so want out of that cage. No one's telling me to keep doing it. No one's saying you need to do blah, 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 blah. I'm the only one in my mind that's keeping me in that cage. I'm the only one who can set myself free. And it's so hard. The energy of it just keeps pulling me back in, back in. I'll like step out, try to fly, spread my wings, fly a little bit. Oh, I get right back in. So can you like comment on that?
Wow, thank you for sharing that. That is really a great observation. I believe that the most important thing to help us really kind of get out of this pattern or this golden cage of the big mask that we wear is to understand the core drive. What is actually driving you? So, because that drive really pushes you back into your mask. So, if for instance, for a caretaker, there's really often a strong drive to take care of people because they believe that somehow that's the only way of getting that feeling of being loved, of being admired, of they're basically going to get something back. So they're trying to be, I'm going to take care because I'm going to get those goodies back. So when you have that wired in your system for so long, for pretty much a lifetime, then that's the way you think that you get love. You think that you have to do this stuff to get love. And so it's scary to say, whoa, what if I wasn't a caretaker? What if I really let go of this pattern? Would I get the goodies I need? Would I get the love? Would I get the appreciation? What would happen? So there's a lot of fear of letting go of that pattern that often arises.
And is there also the thought of, well, not only not getting the love, but people are going to be mad and upset and they're going to get angry with me because I'm no longer taking care of them and they're going to think I'm selfish. So we can even really go
Yeah.
down this thought train, as we call it.
I think it's more that for me. I think it's more that, and we talk about this a lot, like just in our podcasts, how for women, that if we're not just women and moms, we're conditioned that if we're not always being the nurturer and we're not the ones giving, that somehow we are being selfish. And I think that's what I'm afraid of, is being viewed as being selfish and having someone look at me in a negative light, which ties into my perfection mask, because I always had to be the perfectionist in school, getting straight A's, being the good athlete, being the teacher's pet, because all of that external validation was like, oh, okay, good job. So that tied into, into the thought or feeling of, I just want to be viewed in a good light, in a positive light. So if I take off my caretaker mask, and now I'm viewed as being selfish and cold-hearted, which of course I know that's not going to be the case, but that's what my cage tells me. That's what the mask tells me, which is, I know it's completely untrue on a conscious adult level. But, and again, like Tia and I were talking about this, we can also even think about the cage, the masks, whatever the role, as our inner child, because that's what it is. It's my inner child that's saying, oh no, don't step out of this cage. Don't take off the caretaker mask. Don't do that. People might look at you in a bad way. But my adult knows that's not true. So it's really this inner war that's going on with my inner child and my adult self. And my adult self is my true self, my authentic self that wants to fly free from the cage. It's the inner child that says, nope, stay in here where it's safe. Stay where you're protected.
Yeah, that's such a great way of describing that mechanism, what happens, that adult self and the inner child. And for me, what I've done in my own life and with my clients effectively, because I'm a hypnotherapist, for over 20 years. And so I've done a lot of work with inner child and adult selves, is really asking that, getting that inner child, figure out what does the inner child really need to feel safe with this change? What reassurance does it need? What specifically does it need to know and understand about life that maybe somehow it doesn't yet understand? And also it's about just venturing out, right? And taking those few scary steps. And something that I was really thinking about this morning in my relationship with my beloved, my partner, which is amazing, is that what I've been able to do there to uncover my masks that I hadn't been able to do in other relationships was actually get so real and say, here's the mask, here's what I'm wearing.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what I'm afraid is going to happen if I take it off. I'm afraid you're going to think I'm selfish. Or for me, I'm afraid you think I'm stupid. And because of that, I'm afraid that X, Y, Z is going to happen. So to really have that vulnerable conversation about our fears, I think creates huge shifts in our relationship with our partner or whoever this person might be.
So having those conversations with your partner, current partner, is almost preventing. So I just am looking at the image on your book cover, like the bar on the cage is trying to get set up, and you're like, no, I'm going to talk about so the bar doesn't get set into the cage bottom.
Yeah, I love that, Tia. That's such a great description. That's exactly it. I'm finding, in this relationship, I'm so aware now of this phenomenon that I'm just watching out like, ooh, that's a possibility. I could try to build a little cage around there. No, okay, I'm going to get real. I'm going to say what I'm concerned could happen. I'm going to say, hey, I had this fear about, showing up as too needy, actually, of like needing too much from my partner, because again, this whole competent thing. I'm the one who has my act together. And so for me to admit that I have these needs and that I need reassurance. So I have been taking a lot of risks and saying, hey, I could really use some reassurance about this. And it's amazing what has happened.
Wow.
All that competency disappeared. And I'm like, okay, well, what do you need? And it feels so different to be able to be vulnerable in that way. And something I never had in some previous relationships that unfortunately, the cage got so strong. I use this analogy almost as I built bricks up with my partner because these bricks were these things that I was hiding behind, ooh, I have my acts together. I have this, I have that. Of course you want to be with me as a partner. For me, that was how it looked. But we weren't able to connect in the same way. They couldn't really feel my heart because I was hiding behind these things, right? They couldn't feel the love energy as much.
It was that protective love energy. So it was a love, but not a energetic, or am
I sort of think the things that we don't say or the things we hide behind, I use this also as the things we don't say, because it's like there's these like unsaid truths that we're not sure we want to admit 100% sometimes. I think they create these like little brick walls. And so we wake up 5-10 years later in a partnership. That's what happened in my marriage, and realizing that, whoa, I actually have been pretending. I didn't know I was even pretending. Sometimes you don't really know that you're even doing it. And then you just feel like there's this distance that's happened because you haven't had these real vulnerable conversations as often maybe as you needed or at all.
So in the beginning, you mentioned that you work with women, help to empower women that may be stuck in relationships similar to what you're describing right now. So would you say that the only way, if a person that's listening is in one of those relationships and those walls are being built and they are struggling to have that vulnerability, that connection, that heart-to-heart connection that you're talking about, is the person unable to set themselves free and come out of the golden cage? Do they have to leave the relationship in order to be free? Or can they free themselves and still remain in that relationship that may not be for their highest selves?
And they definitely do not need to leave the relationship to be free. Because, I mean, in my situation, that is what happened in this book. People want to read it. It's my personal story. And yet I have worked with other people, and I also believe that it's definitely not necessary to leave a relationship. Because what has happened in that relationship, though, so let's take when you are in that golden cage part of the relationship, you feel trapped, is that you have an unhealthy dance going basically with your partner. You have one relationship pattern that's matched with their relationship pattern, and it's maybe two unhealthy relationship patterns. And so you're just in this dance. So what it really takes is for one person to say, whoa, we have an unhealthy pattern going here, and this is not working for me. And to do the work to figure out how to let go of that unhealthy pattern and create a new pattern, a new dance. And so if one person can step into that dance, that allows the other person to step into a new dance too. Now, it's not quite as easy as I'm saying, because there's this thing that that's called the change back period, basically. So that if you set a new dance, your partner will first be like, what? So for instance, let's talk about caretaking. If you're used to making all the food and doing everything in a relationship, and then one day you say, and you kind of announce it and you start working on, hey, you know what, we're going to have more equality here, and you get to make dinner half the time. Your partner might at the beginning be like, this is crazy, what's going on? And there may be this period of time where your partner's like, I don't like this new dance. And so there's this period called change back, meaning, hey, can we change back? I want to change back. The old dance was a lot more comfortable. I really liked it. But what often will happen in my experience working with women on this, because mostly I'm having women do this, but men can do it too, is that eventually the other partner, after just a little while, is like, oh, okay, well, I guess I can start the new dance too. And they get the new dance and they're willing to do the new dance. Now, of course, there are times when a partner may not be willing to do the new dance, and then we have to determine if this is a deal breaker or not. But the majority of people actually, when the new dance is healthy and they can recognize that it's healthier, will eventually adopt it. That's my belief or experience.
That's really interesting, because we've had conversations on this podcast and off the podcast with other people, in the groups that we're in, our own, the tribes, you want to, with other people on the path. And so a lot of times, one person is making that change to the dance and starting to come out of that golden cage. And as you said, the change back period happens. And I'm just curious, how often is the other person, the other partner who's not necessarily examining their cage and adjust to the new dance, but they're still trapped in a cage and they don't even know it.
Right. I mean, it's challenging because you have the other partner who may or may not want to realize that they're even in a cage, depending on how comfortable they are in their cage.
Sure.
So that's why there's so many different circumstances. So some people work with partners who are like, oh yeah, I get this. And they're really more inclined to make the change. Some are like, oh, okay, we can play with it. And some are more shut down to it. But energetically, as human beings, I think we have to remember this. We tend to want to match. We tend to want to align. We are, I think, built to align more than to disagree, actually. So it becomes really uncomfortable if somebody really does step fully into their power and says, this is the way, I'm going to be showing up now. And if you keep showing up that way, it tends to change. The woman who really brought this to light is she wrote The Dance of Anger, Harriet Lerner Goldar. And it's one of my favorite books of all time. In fact, I have it over here on my bookshelf. And I read that book in my 20s, and reading that book changed my life because I got the whole point of, wow, I have power in my relationships.
And I love that you also talked about relationships at the beginning of our conversation. And it's not just partners, romantic relationships. It's all family relationships, work relationships, friendships, because we can fall into those same relationship patterns. It may look different than it would in a romantic relationship, but we can still be that people pleaser in a friendship or at work. I mean, when I first graduated college, I was an engineering consultant, and it was during a really intense time period that we were going through to get through these regulations. And I would work till 11:30 at night, almost every night, without even thinking about it. Like, no, I have to show up. I have to do this. I have to be, so I was sacrificing myself and my self-care, not knowing it in my mid-20s. But I knew when I left that job, when I started my next one, I'm like, I will do it if needed in those last minute deadlines, but I'm not going to do this every night or even 3 times a week on a consistent basis. So taking those small steps and that awareness is huge, and recognizing how does our golden cage showing up with different people, kind of like you were talking with the different flavors.
Yeah, definitely. I see it showing up across the board in my life. In fact, once I really got what my biggest masks were, and I'm going to keep saying the competency mask is a big one, it shows up everywhere. It shows up, in my interactions with my family members. And I realized that even as a child, I can look back and see how I was the competent one in the family, the one that kept the family together. Like, I have had this role my whole life. I'm the one in my friendships, she's the one that's going to make sure we have the event, that it is on time, that has all this stuff organized for it. So I do it across the board. And so that's what the big aha moment was when I discovered the Enneagram back in 2006. It like rocked my world. I was like, it's everywhere.
So, can I ask you about your boot camp?
Yes, I would love to chat about it.
So you run a relationship boot camp. How often do you do that? What does it look like? What do you dive into? Is it a lot of people or a small group? Just maybe share with our listeners some of how you support people breaking free of these golden cages, stepping into their truth, and all of that.
Thank you, Tia. So the Relationship Reset Bootcamp is what it's called. And I have really designed it to have a big focus during a specific period of time. So it's a 14-day period where you basically get 6 Zoom sessions and they're an hour and a half long. So there'll be 60 minutes of coursework, and we're really discussing different concepts, and then 30 minutes of Q&A discussion. So my idea behind this and why I think this really works well is that a lot of times we get really scattered. We're trying to make a change in our life, but there's so much going on. And so the idea of having this focus is like, I am going to work on creating a change here and really getting what's going on. And so that requires having a focus. And what I've discovered is if you spread it out too much, people are like, oh, I forgot I was even doing this thing. Oh yeah, I'm supposed to do that assignment. And so I'm creating the sense of urgency by like, okay, we're really focused on this. And in the ideal times, maybe pre-COVID, and I've actually done these, having a workshop, like a weekend workshop, has that same focus. You're like, I am doing this for a weekend. I'm immersing myself and shifting my relationship, how I am in a relationship. And so I'm replicating this in one way, in a Zoom way, because spending a weekend on Zoom is crazy. I mean, and even a day.
Yeah.
So anyway, one of the big things is the focus. And then the sense of community. So I am wanting to make sure that everybody feels supported during these boot camps. And that's why I'm keeping it fairly small and having a sense of community. Everybody will be part of a private Facebook group, and there's accountability partners each time you join. And you really have this sense of, I'm working with a group of women on shifting my relationship patterns. So the kind of 3 areas that we kind of work with is who you are in relationship, how you show up is one of the areas. So what is your relationship pattern? What is your core relationship myth? We all have a personal myth about relationships. And there's, I think, about 5 standard ones. But anyway, we look at what your myth is that you may be engaging with the world and with your partner around. And because you have this myth, you don't actually see what the real truth is about your relationship. And one very important factor too that we talk about, and that I have skills and techniques for, is self-love. I really believe the foundation for a good relationship is your ability to really love who you are and accept who you are. And so a lot of the people I work with have had self-love issues. And so when they get in relationship, this tends to show up, unfortunately, as needy love, or basically a constant need for reassurance. Different things happen when you don't have a really strong foundation of self-love.
Yeah. That sounds amazing.
So just really quickly, there's 2 other kind of categories that I want to quickly touch on. One that I'm really think is super important, of course, is communication, and specifically how to work with conflict in relationships. One of my big things. So basically how to diffuse anger, how to shift your own anger, how to work with anger. So intense emotion in a relationship, and the blame and shame game. So that's a whole kind of category that we also work on. And then the intimacy part, and kind of recreating kind of connection, taking down what I call those brick walls, where those unsaid truths, to create more vulnerability in the relationship and really connect on that level. And then how you kind of move from this judgmental energy into more of an accepting energy with your partner, that recreates a sense of intimacy, a sense of like, oh, I really see you and value you and care about who you are. I think sometimes that actually somehow gets missing after a while. We get so caught up that people don't really feel that they really care about our well-being, our partner. It's funny how that happens. Anyway, those are some of the aspects.
Wow. It sounds amazing.
Wow. Did you have any last minute questions, Kim?
No, I'm good.
All right.
I wanted to say one more thing, that I am offering a gift.
Great.
So if you want to go on relationshipresetgift.com, you can download a free gift from me that support you in improving your relationship and bringing it to an even healthier level.
That is fantastic. We'll be sure to put the link in the show notes along with some more information about Margot. So you can reach out to her if you are looking, for joining her boot camp or going deeper into work with her. So by all means, check out the show notes and that. And do you want to quickly say how they can contact you?
Yeah, you can contact me either at margotzaher.com, my name, and my website, or you can also just, if you want to check out the boot camp, it's relationshipresetbootcamp.com. So I would love to connect with you if you have any questions.
Great.
Perfect.
Should I do the
I was
rapid
just gonna
fire questions?
Yep, we do rapid fire questions at the end of each interview.
Yep. So I'm going to ask you 5 questions and then Kim's going to wrap up our time together. So I have a feeling I know what one answer might be just based on our conversation. But the first one, what is the most prominent mask you wear?
Oh, well, basically the competency mask. Hard for me to even say it sometimes, like, oh no.
Oh, I think that's a great one. I don't think that's one we've really explored that much either.
We haven't.
So it's exciting. We love hearing new masks. So thank you for that. So if you could go anywhere in the world, I know you've traveled all over. So where would you go? Would it be someplace new or go back to a place you love? Where would you go?
Oh my gosh, I want to go so many places, but I really want to go to Fiji.
That would be amazing.
Been a dream for many years, and hopefully I will make that happen soon.
You will. Once travel's open.
Exactly.
I'm looking forward to seeing a picture of you in Fiji.
Okay, with my partner.
And what is your favorite way to take care of yourself?
Oh, I think it's hiking in the mountains. It's going just to be in nature. I'm a nature girl.
Oh, and the mountains are so beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
What would be the number one thing on your bucket list if you have one?
Oh my gosh. It has to do with travel. I think my number one thing would be to take a good chunk of time, like 6 months, and basically travel around the world to visit some key places. And specifically, I really want to go to Australia and New Zealand and do some of the hiking there. The New Zealand has some amazing hiking trails that are world famous now.
Ooh, that sounds amazing. And last question. Well, I'm curious if it'll be what I'm thinking it may be based on our conversation again. Name one book that changed your life.
Oh, well, The Dance of Anger. That's so funny. I said it earlier.
It is.
I just love that book so much. Yes, The Dance of Anger. And I think that everybody should read it if you have any challenges in relationship. It's revolutionary, even though it was written back like 20 some years ago, maybe even 30.
It just goes to show you how the wisdom is always there. I mean, like the Enneagram is how many thousands of years old, they think?
Right. The wisdom is there. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to read this book because I have not read it.
Same. I'm going to get it too.
And you'll love it too, because it's not just about personal relationships. She has some great chapters about family dynamics in it.
Fabulous. Well, thank you for the recommendation.
Yes. Thank you so much for having this interview with us. It was so informational. I learned so much. I'm going to go look up the Enneagram for sure and see where I fall into it. So it's been a pleasure. You have already noted, about the free gift. Again, just a reminder, we'll put that in the show notes and we'll put all your contact information again. And any last words that you want to share with us or the listeners before we sign off?
I just really want to thank both of you for having me. It has been so much fun. Such a pleasure connecting with you.
You too. What a great conversation. This is amazing.
Yeah.
And I love reading your book. Your book was really, really helpful.
Yes.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear that. It's always good to hear that it impacts people. And sharing my personal story, actually, it took a lot of vulnerability on my part. It was kind of scary to share.
Yeah.
It was. Thank you.
But you're making a difference with sharing your story and your wisdom. So the book will also be in the show notes too for everyone as well. So be sure to check out Margot's book and her free gift and reach out to her if you have any questions or want to join her boot camp. So thank you, Margot, so much for being here.
Thank you.
It's been great.
Thank you.
Okay,
Bye.
everybody have a great day and thanks again for listening. And we do appreciate your support as always.
Thanks so much. Bye.